This is for the others out there, the other ambitious people who want to play at a higher level in their life. It's time to get curious and get real. Join me, and together, let's find the others. Today, I'm excited to bring you one of my favorite conversations I've ever had on a podcast with Akshay Nanavati. Akshay has overcome drug addiction, PTSD from fighting in Iraq with the Marines, where one of his jobs was to walk in front of vehicles to find bombs, depression, and alcoholism that pushed him to the brink of suicide. Since then, by embracing his demons, he has built a global business, run multiple ultramarathons, climbed mountains in the Himalayas, spent 10 days in darkness and isolation, skied 350 miles across the world's second largest ice cap, and become one of only 26 people to ski up a remote glacier in Antarctica where he lost 2 fingers to frostbite. Despite 4 biological defects, including a blood disorder the 2 doctors told him would kill him in boot camp, he's now a sponsored athlete and is currently training for a solo 110-day, 1,700-mile, never-before-accomplished crossing of Antarctica. That's right, he's attempting the world's first solo unassisted crossing of Antarctica. Combining his life experience with years of research in neuroscience, psychology, and spirituality, he wrote the book Fearvana, about which the Dalai Lama said, "Fearvana inspires us to look beyond our own agonizing experiences and find the positive side of our lives." Akshay is on a mission to help our human family explore the edges and fall in love with suffering in order to create a life of greater meaning, purpose, joy, and fulfillment. You can give Akshay a follow on Instagram at Fearvana and donate to his crowdfunding campaign for his expedition across Antarctica at greatsoulcrossing.com. What a treat this conversation was. What an incredible character and what a privilege it was to have a conversation with Akshay. So without further ado, please welcome Akshay Nanavati. Well, Akshay, it is great to see you again, my friend.
You too, man.
It's a pleasure. I was just laughing as we were getting started here before we got everything rolling, telling you about how I'm going to be in Arizona coming up with my cousin for this Ironman triathlon, and usually people are just like, "What? Like that's crazy. How long? What's the distance?" And you're just like, "I totally get it." So it's a pleasure to speak to someone who gets it in depth and deeply and pushes boundaries to an extent that is almost inconceivable to most humans. So it's a pleasure to connect, brother.
Likewise, brother. Thanks for having me on, man.
Of course. So you were telling me you're getting ready to go to Minnesota coming up here, right?
Yeah, I'm heading up to Minnesota this winter for a training expedition. It'll be 30 days at first with at an Airbnb with my fiance, who's not a giant fan of the cold, and I'm dragging to Minnesota, the coldest part of the country, for her first Arizona winter. But we'll be doing 30 days together, and I'll just go out every day skiing with a very, very, very heavy sled as part of my training for what I'll talk about here in a second.
Yeah.
And then after that, she'll come back to Scottsdale, and I'll be going out 40 days solo, full out in the wilderness, to like camping, dragging a very heavy sled for 40 days alone.
Amazing. So yeah, tell us about what your big goal is right now. What are we working towards?
This is training for next year at about almost this time exactly. In end October of next year, I'll be flying to Chile and then Antarctica to attempt what will be the first ever solo unsupported ski crossing of the entire continent of Antarctica. I'll be dragging a 400-pound sled with 110 days worth of food and fuel to survive in one of the most hostile environments of the planet and make a ski crossing from one coast to the other coast, which will be 1,700 miles. And this has never been done before without dogs or kites. And so my goal is to be the first to pull this off without any wind power, any dog power, just pure man hauling in a very, very savage environment. And for parts of this journey, I will be geographically the most isolated human being on the entire planet, which is quite daunting and intense to think about.
Yeah, and I wonder what you'll find in those moments of isolation.
I cannot wait. That's a big part of the draw is, in that silence, in that stillness, in that depth of suffering is when you really start to open doors into the human soul that you don't get to open otherwise. And that's one of the biggest draws for doing things like this.
Absolutely. And I have a lot to pick your brain around Fearvana and your teachings, your concepts, what you speak to, what you work with people on. But kind of a question, and maybe it ties into that. Simple question, probably very loaded question. Why?
I get it a lot and I love it.
Yeah.
So 2 reasons. I think every big goal should have kind of a selfish and a selfless motivation.
Mm.
So the selfish desire for me is to go into those spaces to unearth that wisdom that can only be found in the depth of solitude, in the depth of suffering, to
Mm.
access and open doors into the human soul that are so very rarely opened. So it is to enlightenment, really. Like when I'm in these,
Mm.
obviously this is not my first expedition. I wouldn't, I've done a lot of expeditions to prepare for something like this. And the places you go, while very, very hard, it's profoundly beautiful to access that place. Out in these expeditions, the volume of life is dialed up to a 12, right? So everything you feel more intensely. Life is amplified. So the highs are so high, but the lows are also painfully low. Some of the lowest lows you'll ever experience. But that's part of the draw, because in this one condensed period of time, it becomes a microcosm for the entire human experience. You get to experience a lifetime's worth of this human condition in one moment, right? And it's all dialed up as high as it can possibly be. So that for me is the selfish draw, is enlightenment. It's just transcendence. The suffering that I will inevitably experience, it's not the reason why I go, but it's what the suffering gives you. Because you have to battle the dragon to find the treasure. You can very much relate to it. Like the cold tub is an experience of that, right? You have to battle the dragon to find the treasure on the other side of that. And this is exactly why I go for those treasures and to see what it will unearth. And the selfless motivation is to bring those treasures back and to share that wisdom with our human family. Everybody's battling their own version of a polar storm. Everybody has their own Antarctic cross. It could be, a single mom working 3 jobs to provide for a kid. It could be building a business, writing a book, whatever the thing may be. Everybody's battling their own demons. Everybody struggles. And because I have the privilege of going out onto most extreme environments on Earth, and it is a privilege, I'm well aware of that. I've been to places, as I've been to war. I've worked with survivors of sex trafficking, with former child soldiers. I've seen the darkest of the human condition. And I'm not unaware that I get to choose my suffering. That is a luxury that many, many don't have. And so because of that, because I get to go so deep out and so far out onto the edge, I get to open those doors that are very rarely open. And that grants me the privilege of accessing and unearthing this wisdom given to me by the edge that I can then bring back and have conversations like what I'm having with you, or do speaking events, or sharing through programs, through coaching, through a nonprofit, all these different vehicles to share, to help others navigate their own demons and transcend their own suffering, whatever it may be.
Fantastic. I love that approach that you're bringing to this as well. And that's a great framework of thinking about any goal or any big goal, having the selfish reason and the selfless reason as well. So I like that framework quite a lot. And one of the things that I've always, and Edge Theory Labs, right? That's the name of our business. Yeah. And I like how you use that word edge there as well. And that was where that name came from, is that we do believe that greatness happens at the edge of your comfort zone. It's like there's that zone, right? When you're just like in that discomfort, when you're in that quote unquote suffering, when you're in that place of uncharted territories, like that's where the magic happens. That's where the juice happens. And that's where you get to know yourself as well. And that's why I love doing these endurance races. And I love pushing myself in those ways, because it feels like it's such an honest expression. And it feels like you really get to know yourself in those moments when you're in your everything in your body wants to quit, or you're in deep suffering. So can you talk a little bit more about that and your experience with that?
Yeah. Because when you're in that space, it breaks down the masks that we put on to exist in society. No matter how authentic and real you are, when you go out, there's a show you kind of put on, right, to fit in each realm. In the purity of pain, it breaks down those masks. And it reveals the true essence of the human experience. A good example of this is war. War reveals humanity at its absolute worst. You see the horrifying things people do to each other, but it also reveals humanity at its best. You see people sacrificing their lives for another, jumping on a grenade for another, walking into a burning Humvee to pull somebody else out. So at the extremes of the human condition, it reveals the essence of our character and who we can be. And sometimes you might go there and say, okay, I didn't like what I found, but that doesn't mean you're defined by that, right? I wasn't always like this. When I was a kid, I was scared of everything. I still remember once we had gone to travel to Australia with my parents, and I was snorkeling out on the Great Barrier Reef, and I got to a point where the reef ended and there was the black abyss of the ocean, and I was too scared and I turned around. I used to be scared of Ferris wheels, let alone roller coasters. So point is to say, if you don't like what you find on that edge, you can still keep going out there. That's how you get stronger, right? I'm not far from perfect. I've failed a lot. I've made mistakes. I've gone through struggles. I lost 2 fingers to frostbite when I was in Antarctica a couple of years ago, right? So you fall a lot, but every time you fall, you rise back up and push a little further, and then you tap into a new space. So that's what I love about the purity of pain. It reveals the true
Mm,
human essence, the truth of who we are without any masks, without any facades. And that allows you to tap into the divinity of the human spirit, right?
mm.
It's the human spirit, the ability to transcend suffering, that brings out the greatness of us all, and then not just for our own highest version of ourselves, but for others as well, right? In the Marines, you're living for the good of the group. Nobody cares about your well-being. It's for the men and the mission. And to live in an institution like that, and this is separate from all the politics, of course, there's a lot of nonsense out
Sure.
there, no doubt. But on the ground, we're serving each other. We're serving for each other, for the people out there, and to live in that reality where you transcend your own suffering for something bigger, whether it be someone else or even for your own highest version of yourself. It's a beautiful thing.
It really is, and just in the verbiage too, the purity of pain and how it can purify as well is something I've been focusing. It's been very present for me right now as well with everything going on in the world, and I
Yeah.
really am using this as an opportunity and viewing this, viewing pain that you can feel like as a way to bring you closer to God, to the divinity, to your soul, to yourself. It's just as much of a pathway as the other side of the coin of joy or ecstasy or enlightenment, right? Like feeling those emotions of fear, of pain. Something that I've heard you say before is fear and pain are not your enemy, but how can it be? And what I'm hearing you and what I'm reflecting in my own life as well is like, how can they potentially be tools or feedback or pathways to bring you closer to God, closer to yourself, closer
Exactly.
to your highest potential?
In the Marines, we always used to say there's no atheists in foxholes. And
Hmm.
when do people reach out to God most? When they're in pain. So pain becomes such a beautiful moment to tap into the divinity, to tap into the divinity of the human spirit, to tap into God. Because for me, we all have our own version of what that word means, of what
Sure.
God means. We all have our own relationship to God, but it's that transcendence of ourself where you no longer are attached to your own body, mind, feelings, and you rise above, right? You rise above for someone else, for something else. And pain, like suffering to me, is a training ground for transcendence. And transcendence is that experience of God. So
Hmm.
even in the experience of, I mean, whether it be on polar travel or cold tubs, going to war, as I said, right? That pain is when you allow yourself to tap into God so you can move through it. And it's such
Hmm.
a beautiful experience to go through that divinity. It's a really profound playground.
It is. It is. I love that word as well. Profound playground. Now, tell me about what your relationship with the concept of surrender and how you relate surrender to the concept of suffering or the surrender to the concept of going into these extreme conditions, cold, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Surrender is a muscle I've built over the years that wasn't as strong till right now.
Hmm.
I was a giant control freak, right? I think a lot of entrepreneurs are, a lot of people are. The world is in my hands. I'm going to control my own fate. But through experiences like sitting in, I think you might know, I did a 10-day darkness retreat. Well,
Hmm.
first, before that, I did a 7-day darkness where I sat in a completely dark room, can't see your hand in front of your darkness 24 hours a day for 7 days the first time, 10 days the next second time. And that's where I started to build the muscle of surrender, because you just surrender to the darkness to see what will be revealed. And I think surrender is absolutely essential in navigating the suffering, because surrender teaches you to accept the isness. To accept the isness of the world, most of which is beyond our control, and to accept the isness of whatever is arising within. So it's a really good example of this. I was in the Arctic earlier this year on an expedition, and I was completely alone after being hammered by 2 days of insane polar storms, hurricane force winds, just battering me. And then I was skiing and the snow was very soft. And I was dragging this very heavy sled up and down these kind of undulating terrain in Norway. And if the snow was harder, it would have been much easier. But I kept saying, thank you, God, for these perfect conditions, because the conditions were perfect in that they could not be anything other than what they were. Right. So surrendering to the isness of the experience. If I try to resist it, oh, I wish it wasn't like this. I wish it was harder snow. Right. Then you're resisting what is. And that just makes the suffering a million times worse. And it's
Mm.
not even in terms of the external circumstance where it really matters. And this is, I think, the harder nuance is actually accepting and surrendering to the emotions we experience, because we don't control most of what happens in our own brain. Like right now, as I'm talking to you, if somebody comes into this room with a gun, I'm going to feel fear. I'm not choosing it. It's an emotion beyond my control. It's a subconscious response to stimuli.
Sure.
Now, if I choose to resist that, which is what, especially when it comes to the quote unquote negative emotions, I don't use that term because there are no bad or good emotions. They're just emotions. But what I refer to as the challenging ones, like fear, stress, anxiety, guilt, anger, right? We resist them because we're often taught we should not feel them. And so when we feel them, we think there's something wrong with us, right? Even in a lot of the personal development world, we'll say, try to resist anxiety. Like I worked with one client who was going to Iceland on his own for a vacation. And he kept feeling nervous because he was going to Iceland on his own. And he looked at all the crazy things I do and was like, why am I scared of something so basic? And it's not that I was any braver. The only reason going to Iceland on my own wouldn't scare me because I've had a lot of references to say this is not a scary experience, that this wasn't warrant risk. He had never been on an experience on his own. So it didn't have references to access. So the fear showed up. The problem was not the fear. It was his belief that he should not feel it. What's wrong with me? Why am I feeling this? And he was calling himself a piece of shit. This kind of that self-dialogue, right? A great way to understand this is Buddha said we're all stabbed by the two darts of suffering. The first dart is the one we don't control. The fear arising within us beyond our conscious choice and our awareness, beyond our conscious control. The second dart is that dialogue we have around it. What's wrong with me? Why do bad things happen to me? And the second dart of suffering is what creates the real problem. When you accept, notice, this comes back to your question about surrender. Surrender to the isness. Got it. I'm feeling this emotion. This does not mean this is who I am. I do not have to be defined by this because I'm not my thoughts. I'm not my feelings. I'm not my experiences. I'm the thinker of my thoughts. I'm the feeler of my feelings, and I'm the experiencer of my experiences. And so surrender, acceptance of what is, allows you to be with what is, so you do not have to be defined by what is. And that's how you transcend it. Yeah. It's a foundation.
And there's so much strength in that, right? That was something that I talk about often as well. And one of the lessons that the cold taught me was that there is strength in surrender. And the way that you get through the cold is not by like getting yourself hyped up and trying to like muscle your way through it and brave it because you'll get slapped silly, but it's accepting, okay, cool. This is sensation. I'm feeling a lot. This cold, why do we associate cold with bad, right? Like I'm feeling cold, but I'm feeling alive. I'm feeling sensation. My body's awake. It's alive. It's activating. And surrendering to that, accepting that, letting the cold win, as one of my good friends always says, and I love that. Let the cold win. You see people just when you give that cue to someone in the tub, it's just like then it becomes easy and it becomes warm, right? Your experience with reality changes in that moment, and that's what I find so fascinating. And I had a reference point to that as well. This summer, my dad and I decided we were going to paddleboard across the lake that we go to every summer. And it was like it's an 18-mile lake, and so it took the better part of a day to do. And in one of our trainings, we decided to we caught this gnarly headwind, and we were just in this gnarly headwind moving at like a crawl. It felt like we were barely moving. And I was, to use your analogy of those two darts, it's like, all right, the first dart is we're in a headwind right now. Okay, cool. This sucks. Exactly. But then the second dart is like, why are we in this headwind? Or why can't the wind shift? Or I'm never gonna we're gonna be there so late now, or this is gonna be horrible. And so I use that as an opportunity to be like, all right, cool. Like, this is what it is, and I'm going to surrender to the fact that we're in this gnarly headwind and it's white capping and it's really challenging. And as soon as I became okay with that, and like you said, thank you God for the perfect conditions, and just bought into that, then I felt my resistance completely let go of, and then you're just doing what you're doing. And then the kicker was that I swear the wind started shifting. It's like almost in real time, and it's just this incredibly intimate and divine experience that I'm having, where then the reality starts to match that as you're moving with it in real time. It's fascinating.
Love that. It is a beautiful experience to go through that when you stop resisting the business of whatever life throws at you.
Absolutely. So I'm curious about your darkness retreat, because that's something personally that I've been interested in. You did 7 days. Were you fasting during that as well, or how did you eat food?
I did a juice fast. So just you can choose food, but I chose to do a juice fast.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. And what were some of the takeaways from that experience for you, from either the 7 or the 10 day? What did that bring you, or what did you walk away with that?
The first time I went from a very different space. The first time I went in, I just gone through a very challenging divorce. I broke my sobriety. When I do anything, I do it pretty hard. So when I broke my sobriety, I broke it hard. And so I didn't like that version of myself, because I had struggled with drinking after the war and then sobered up, but then I broke it. And so I went into the darkness to kind of heal, to figure out some new answers, find some new answers within, because that's one of the most beautiful parts of the darkness is when you shut off your visual sense you are shutting off one of the primary ways in which we engage with the world. So even as simple as that's a white wall, but now my consciousness has somewhere external to latch onto, right? When you shut that off, you have nowhere external to latch onto, so you go within. And one of the unique things that also happens in the darkness is you start to see lights. They say your brain starts to release DMT. So these lights are as real as the lights in front of me right now. I mean, the lights viscerally real. In fact, the brightest light I've ever seen in my entire life was sitting in a dark room. It was so bright. I was touching my eyelids like this because I couldn't tell if they were open or closed. I was shielding my eyes. It was blinding, like literally blinding, sitting in a dark room, which was profound. So what that was to me is an experience of pure oneness of how that's what the darkness taught me. When we were talking earlier about control and surrender, it led to this realization for me that in life, there are these series of dualities that encompass the human experience, right? There's darkness and light, life and death, masculine, feminine, ego, humility, contentment, discontentment, stress, recovery, fear, nirvana, pain, pleasure, so on and so forth. There's a series of dualities. And we often demonize one side as bad. The pain is bad, the darkness is bad, the fear is bad. But in the darkness, I viscerally experienced light and darkness coexisting as one. Not to mention, when I first came out of the darkness, probably as much as I loved what I got in the darkness, and I was actually journaling in there as well. So I got like beautiful insights and tapping into my own version of God, finding insights about my own struggles with this guilt, because I've struggled a lot with survivor's guilt from losing a friend in the war and things like that. But when I came out of the darkness after 7 days, they took me out, sat on a deck in Black Forest in Germany. They had a mask on and said, whenever you're ready, take it off. And when I took it off, the way the light looked in those few moments, it was, I mean, I was tears coming down my eyes, moved to tears. It was so profound. And I remember thinking to myself, I felt this deep sense of gratitude for every bit of pain and suffering I've ever experienced in life, because in a very visceral and concrete, knowing kind of way, I understood that you cannot truly fully appreciate the light unless you have first been in the dark. So every side of this duality, right? Pain and pleasure, you need both sides to coexist. When both sides coexist, that's how you attain a new awakening. That's how you attain, call it enlightenment, spiritual peace, right? It's not in the demonization of one side of any duality. It's the acknowledgement that both sides have their place. And when you actually embrace two edges, you find a oneness in them. Beautiful. That's what, like the first time. The second time I went in the darkness, I was in a great place, but I went in as training for Antarctica for the this was just about last year. So it was for the 110 days of solitude, which was quite a bit of solitude I'm going to get to experience, and wanted to practice further mastery over my mind. I've gotten deep into studying method acting. So I was going in there to create the identity, the person I need to be in order to ski across Antarctica. And that was also really profound. Like I had what I would call a conversation with God, and lights being revealed to me through these shapes in my meditations that left me bawling in tears.
Who is that character? Is that someone that you're still developing?
It's someone I'm being more, great question. It is someone I'm able to be more now fully and tap into and access more at will and go into that space. Because when you get in this practice of creating a character that you want to be, the first step is understanding what are the virtues of the character. Who do you need to be, right? So if you like, that's why I was studying method acting, because method actors, to me, it's one of the most profound spiritual tools for evolution that we don't really talk about in the context of personal growth. It's used for acting, but if you think about it, these are actors who are creating an entirely new character that the great method actors, they dream as that character. They have thoughts and feelings that are not their own, but the characters, right? So for me, before even going into the dark, I started to understand what is the character? What does he need? What are the virtues? What are the traits? What are the characteristics? And then I would start practicing being this character by tire dragging, by doing the craft of the character, right? Like a method actor, for example, when Daniel Day-Lewis was training for Last of the Mohicans, he went out and lived in the wilderness. He built his own canoe. So you have to get into the being and the physicality of the character. And then this is coming back to the thing about surrender, is this version of me cannot create the new character because this version of me is limited by the paradigms, the constructs, the belief systems of this reality. And each one of us, we don't know what we don't know, right? I don't know, all of us. How could we possibly know what we don't know? So we don't know that. So the way to build a character, this is why solitude is so essential, because the world and other people, no matter how much they love you, they're going to react to you, as the version of you they know. When you go into solitude, and now you can surrender, and it is a mad process. Like it will feel mad, and it should feel mad because that's when you're entering a new edge, that like this version of you is teetering on the brink. So you're flirting with something new that hasn't existed before. And when I was doing this in the darkness, I would pace back and forth on the yoga mat and just surrender to let madness be unleashed. Let the character speak to itself. And I was saying phrases that I've never said before, and this Heath Ledger actually did this when he was preparing for the Joker. Obviously very tragic what happened to him, but he went and locked himself in a hotel room for 6 weeks and started journaling as the Joker. He had to take a period of time in isolation to create a new identity, to create a new character. Now, obviously, it was a very dark character to create, and it was terrible what happened to him, but his performance was brilliant.
Yeah,
absolutely brilliant, right? So it was that process and then creating the character that I'm now able to embody in the beingness of when I go out there and train, when I go into Minnesota, when I'm in the Arctic, right? But the core virtue to do this, I think that there's 3 core virtues that I've learned over time, I think are essential to mastery and personal development. And every other virtue kind of springs forth from these 3. It's presence, courage, and curiosity. If you have these 3, everything else springs from under the courage. Maya Angelou once said, courage is the most important of all virtues, because without courage, you can only practice other virtues erratically, but not consistently. And presence is what allows, pure presence in the isness of the moment, allows courage to create a place, and curiosity gives you that realm to venture out in the unknown. That's huge for me, because when you go out and play on these edges, you don't know what you're going to find.
Right.
And curiosity is what creates excitement for that. I don't know who I'm going to be on the other side of Antarctica, but I'm freaking curious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wow. When you're training, you're towing a lot of weight. You said 400 pounds. So
the sled will be about 1 pound.
Yep. The sled will be about 400 pounds. So I think I've seen videos on Instagram of you dragging tires or dragging a tire. Is that about 400 pounds, or is that super heavy, or what?
No, it's not 400 pounds, because I'm not trying to replicate the weight. The tire, because on the pavement, there's friction.
Right.
So I don't think I could move a 400-pound tire. But the point is just to make sure it's heavy enough to suffer, especially in an Arizona summer.
Yeah, exactly. So you're going into that. So what's your training been like, especially given the fact that this has been kind of a moving target for you as well? Maybe talk a little bit about some of the challenges of actually hitting the start line.
Physically, when I was in Antarctica 2 years ago on a smaller training expedition, I ended up getting frostbite, lost 2 fingers to frostbite. So that delayed, because I was supposed to go the following year for the full crossing. That didn't delay it because it took 7 months just to heal. Frostbite is quite a long, intense injury of dealing with your finger being black, and it was gnarly to witness. And then I was supposed to go this year, and that got delayed again for logistical reasons as well as funding reasons. The crossing cost $750,000, so it's quite expensive to pull this off. So raising funds, but also the company that organizes logistics, it was the first time creating a logistical plan for something this big. So it's not just the challenge of the mental and physical challenge. It's quite a logistical challenge to pull this off, so creating that plan took a little bit more time than necessary. So those have been some of the delays, and then inevitably you have to keep training for it. So every year I've been on various expeditions. I've been to Iceland on a mini training expeditions, doing things like the Darkness Retreat, going to Antarctica. Earlier this year, I was in the Arctic for 2 months on training expeditions out there. Now I'm going to Minnesota. And then while I'm at home, my core training is the tire dragging. So dragging tires for hours on end. I do a lot of hiking, weighted hikes. I do a lot of strength training. I have a rower right behind me. I have a new fit machine that I'm using. And then for recovery, I had paused cold tubs for a long time, but now getting back into it. And of course, you're supporting me in this, which I'm so humbled and grateful for. But getting back now into cold tubs for recovery, sauna for recovery. So doing a lot of recovery work, compression boots, red light, like you name it. Meditations for the mental part of the training, breath work as well. I've even doing hypoxic training, where I have a high altitude machine that's sitting right there that I do hypoxic training with. So, the gamut, because this is so big to pull this off. I have to find that edge wherever I can get it,
Yeah, it makes total sense. One of the things I want to go back to that you were saying previously about these dualities, if you will, or these perceived dualities, fear and nirvana on 2 sides of the coin. And you've put those 2 together in a really brilliant way with coining the term Fearvana. Can you speak a little bit more about the concept of Fearvana?
Sure. And as you said, right, it's this idea that fear and nirvana, 2 seemingly contradictory notions that are in fact complementary, and that fear is not the antithesis to nirvana. It's the access point to it. So I was living this lifestyle, playing on these edges, exploring my own fears. And as I said, I used to be scared of everything. And even today, I'm not scared. People often see the insane things I do and think I'm quote unquote fearless. Far from it. Terrified. Even the normal things I'm now engaged. Going on a date was more scary to me than all the insane things I do. I kid you not. Butterflies in my stomach, anxiety going on the date with my now
That's
fiance.
amazing.
So the point is not to eliminate the fear, right? That when you face it, when you enter it, that's when you access nirvana. And so I define Fearvana as the bliss that results from engaging our fears to pursue our own worthy struggle. And I call it the worthy struggle, but you can use your term, the path. I don't like passion for what you do is really good, but I sometimes resist from that term because when people say follow your passion, it kind of conveys this notion that life will all be sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns.
Right.
And I think you know it's not that way. So I use the term your worthy struggle. And it doesn't have to be doing what I do.
Beautiful.
I cannot stress enough. I'm certainly not saying across Antarctica is the only path to enlightenment, but it's finding your struggle, building a business, writing a book, raising a child, playing basketball, whatever the thing is, it will be hard. But when you push into it, when you step in with courage, hence coming back to courage being that fundamental virtue, you will feel fear because you can't have courage without fear. It took no courage on my part to travel on my own, but it took more courage on that client's part when he went to Iceland on his own because I had no fear doing that. He did, right? So you need fear for courage. And when you step into that, when you exercise courage to step into the fear, you attain that bliss of nirvana. You attain the new awakening. You attain the spiritual growth that happens from exercising courage to walk through whatever demons you might be facing, whatever the fear is.
That's fantastic. A line that comes to mind as you say that is, we must choose the challenges that inspire us. Otherwise, life will give us challenges. And when that's relating to the worthy struggle. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Yeah, another way I put that is if you don't seek out a worthy struggle is going to find you anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And something I find interesting, and I'd love to kind of dissect this with you as well, is I feel like there's again, you've seen the spectrum of human struggle and humanity from the depths of war and from the heights of working with people and seeing the overcoming of that struggle as well. But I think that something that I'm noticing today, especially in our generation with a lot of younger people, is I feel like the absence of a worthy struggle is actually creating a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. And I look at that on like a physiological level on our nervous system, where we think about being in just rest and digest all the time and not doing anything is good, but we need to be in this kind of like excite and delight, not necessarily redlining into our, into fight or flight all the time, but there's this kind of elasticity of our nervous system and where we can be in that zone of that worthy struggle or of challenging ourselves is where I think fulfillment can really come from. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, but I almost feel like there can be a lack of worthy struggle or a lack of suffering that is driving more suffering. I'm curious to get your thoughts or insight on that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. When you don't seek it out, you're going to suffer anyway. Life's going to punch you in the face, whether you like it or not. And the malaise we're seeing in society is clear evidence of that, because I empathize with the younger generation because now there's more paradox of choice. There's the paradox of choice. There's more options. We have these little dopamine machines all around us. When I grew up, we didn't have that. And I could not be more grateful for it, because it's destroying the brain on a neurological level.
Right.
And as you said, it's creating this absence of purpose because if I don't know what I want, I don't know what to chase and I do nothing. And then we see the malaise of society. And I also think it's one of the greatest problems with our approach to mental health is that we think it is a state without tension. We think it's a state without stress. Right. Mental health means I'm feeling great all the time. Life is this inner peace, this balance. But to me, inner peace is not the absence of chaos or conflict. It's the acceptance of them. Coming back to that acceptance of the isness, you'll deal with conflict, internal, external. You will deal with chaos, internal, external. Accept it, use it, thrive in it, be with it. That's why cold tub is such a powerful experience. As you've seen, and I've seen people go through their first cold tub experience tearing up after because how moving it is for them. So that's a microcosm of life, right?
Yes.
You got to chase that. And it's not about knowing what the right path is. It's about chasing a path. My life trajectory has changed immensely. At one point when I joined the Marines, I wanted to go career military. That path changed. Some people, there's a handful of very small people who know what they want to do when they're 5 years old, right? Like I have a friend who's a grandmaster in chess. She started at a young age. Awesome. I was not that. Right, wrong it's not a right, wrong to it, right? My path changed, but I have no regrets for being in the Marines and the life experience it made me. So I think now there's also this notion that young people should know exactly what they want. Instead, leap into it with obsessiveness, with drive, with courage, You will fall along the way. And then you might realize, all right, this wasn't for me. I came back from war, realized, all right, I don't want to do career Marines. Path changed, but it all worked out beautifully. I learned so much from it. It shaped the very essence of my being. So yeah, I completely agree that it's the lack of purpose. And even if you look at the research on happiness, the two core ingredients for creating true fulfillment are connection and purpose, right? Or connection and what I call the worthy struggle. So building human connection, your tribe, your family, the family doesn't just mean blood family, like your family, your people around you, and then chasing your worthy struggle. When you fulfill those two buckets, and this is not to say life will be easy. You'll still suffer, but then the suffering can be beautiful, right? You get it. You're about to do an Ironman. My thing is, it's not like when we do this, we don't suffer, but there's beauty in that, which is why we keep chasing it.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. You mentioned earlier that you've had a journey with sobriety, right? So it was after the Marines, when you came back from war, you found yourself in addiction with alcohol, with substance?
I struggled with drugs actually before the Marines in high school.
Gotcha.
Lost
Okay.
friends to drug addiction then, and then stopped drugs, but then alcohol after the war. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about I'm just very curious about your journey with sobriety. It's something I find very interesting.
Yeah, when I came back from the war, I lost a friend in the war, struggled a lot with survivor's guilt.
Mm-hmm.
2 junior Marines killed themselves after the war. And there was a lot around this. Why do I get to live when so many others have suffered more than me?
Yeah.
Seeing places that I've seen, that was one thing that came up in the darkness. It felt like just by being born to good parents in India, I've been blessed with a million times more opportunities than most on earth who are born into hell on earth. And I didn't do a damn thing to deserve that. Right. So struggling, I got lucky, born to a great card, great hand of cards. So I struggled a lot with that. And after the war, the drinking, I would go from 1 day of drinking to 3 days to 5 days. And I'm talking like a bottle of vodka a day until I would wake up. I would wake up and then drink again. And I'd be throwing up in the toilet as soon as the throwing up's done, picking up the bottle, drinking again. An absurd amount. And one morning after 5 days of this, I was seconds away from slitting my own wrists. And just the shock that I had gotten to a place where I seriously considered ending it was jarring. That kind of woke me up out of the stupor. And then I started delving deep into neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, doing that inner work to face my own demons. Because the addiction is a symptom, right? Like I was doing everything I can to escape my own demons, to escape my demons from the war, to avoid them, to run away from them. And now I had to face them. And that's what led me to Fearvana and led to a lot of the things I'm sharing with you, that this recognition that even with post-traumatic stress, I'd been diagnosed with it because I struggled with survivor's guilt. I was jumpy with loud noises. I was hypervigilant around crowds. And I was told these were symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. But as I started doing all the research, I was like, this is not a disorder. I spent 7 months in a war zone where loud noises meant death. Inevitably, I was jumpy. That's a normal human response to war. But when we label it as a disorder, it becomes that second dart that creates my sense of identity. There's something wrong with me. Instead of accepting the isness, I could not control the fact, at least initially, that I was jumpy with loud noises. But the more I resisted it, the worse it became. Instead of saying, God, I'm jumpy, let me pause and be with that. Let me create the space between the first start of that stimuli showing up and who I choose to be outside of it. Even the guilt, right? Everybody told me not to feel guilty. And I get it. In war, you can't control what happens. My buddy drove over an IED. His vehicle, the IED exploded and he was killed. When I was in Iraq, my vehicle drove over an active bomb that for some reason didn't explode. Why does that happen? There is no answer, right?
Yeah.
Why does that happen? But all of these things I struggled with until I started reframing that my relationship to these things. Like the guilt was not a bad emotion. My guilt was an expression of love for my brother. So for a long time, what I did was I put a picture of my friend that I lost in the war, and it said, this should have been you. Earn this life. So my guilt became my ally. And that's the kind of doing that inner work, facing those demons around my own relationship to the war, to my guilt, to the life that I've been gifted, is what helped me sober up and helped me then want to use this life that I've been gifted to be of service, to be of value, and to earn this life. Like, to me, I believe that there's a debt I owe for this life that I've been gifted. And I'm not saying this is a right way to think. This is not, you certainly do not have to think this. In fact, many of my friends, many mental health professionals have said it's unhealthy to think this way. But the point that I'm making is not to say this is a right way to think. The point is, we all have our own darkness. We all have our own pain that we've suffered. They are not your enemy. When you engage it, when you tap into it, the trauma can be fuel for growth. Post-traumatic growth is as real as post-traumatic stress disorder and can be even more real if you make that paradigm your reality. So I believe I owe a debt for this life because I was born to good parents, because I've seen the darkest corners of the globe, because my vehicle drove over a bomb and didn't explode. So I owe a debt for this life, and that works for me. It's not a right way to think. It works for me, but I've turned my darkness into fuel, and that's the point, and that's how it helped me sober up.
Fantastic. And one of the things that I find striking is that you're authoring your story, right? Like what you're saying there is you're taking the pen and you're saying, I'm writing this, and I can tell myself the story that I want to tell myself in order for me to show up as best as I can. And we all have that ability to frame things, to shift our paradigm, to be able to see things in a certain way that allow us that resonate and that feel really aligned within our body, and that allow us to continue to show up for what we need to show up for and what we need to do. Like that's the difference. And we have the ability to do that.
Absolutely. That starts with the foundation of self-awareness.
Right.
And that comes from stillness. I cannot stress enough the value of being still. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And I think humanity could not be a more clear depiction of that. And he also said, right, clearly, right? And one of my favorite quotes from him ever is, he says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Stillness is how you make that unconscious conscious. Darkness is you don't have to go to that extreme, but it's a great tool. You could do things like sit still, lock yourself in a room for 2 hours. It'll be extremely challenging, but your mind will take you places that you haven't gone, and you will unearth that.
Yeah, there's a great book that I read. I think it was Ryan Holiday, Stillness is the Key. That was really a great paradigm shift for me as well. And I caught myself just not too long ago as I was waiting for the elevator, and it's like a 2-second moment of stillness, and I found myself instinctively grabbing my phone to like pull open social media or something. And I caught myself in that moment of realizing this is like a pacifier, right? This is literally, I'm pacifying myself, and I couldn't even make it 30 seconds to wait for the elevator without trying to give myself some stimulus, because there was a moment of pause, and that just helped further examine for myself and opened up that curiosity of, well, what happens if I can move through that or settle through that or let those kind of thoughts go? What's beneath that? And that's helped me build such a deep level of self-awareness as journaling. And I'm curious, what tools, or how did you get started in your self-awareness journey? Was this post your time in service, post Marines, post war? Was this before that? When did you develop, or when did you really come to stillness as a way of building self-awareness?
I would say stillness hit me a lot more after struggling with the drinking. I got into outdoor sports and exploring new edges after the Marines. As I said, right before this, I was very scared of everything. So after going to the Marines first taught me the beauty of suffering, the beauty of adversity, and going to war with yourself to see what you'll find. So I explored every edge I could find, every outdoor sport you can think of. I've been blessed to have experienced, and to push myself through those edges. But I never really navigated and dealt with stillness until after the drinking. And that's when I started to find the beauty in that as a mechanism to just be with what is and see what arises. And then going through the darkness was after the drinking, because I realized I had explored a ton of edges. I pushed myself physically in so many ways, right? But that new edge that was still, that I hadn't gone to, was stillness, which is what drove me to the darkness as a mechanism to really tap into that at its most extreme. And now, consistent meditation, even like, for example, tire dragging is a mind-numbingly slow activity, mind-numbingly slow. So doing that, sometimes I'll listen to music and stuff, but very often with none, and just, it's kind of its own version of stillness. You know, that it's, because it's so slow, you're not really, and you're doing it around a damn park. You're not exactly getting a lot of novel stimuli as you're running through new areas or hiking through new areas. Around a tiny little park.
It's interesting, but as I've come to love swimming for that reason. Like I swimming, when it comes to triathlon, was my absolute worst, and I couldn't swim, one lap back and forth on a pool without being winded previously. But I've come to love it because you get into this rhythm of just breath and movement, and movement. And when you're doing it in a pool as well, like you said, it's just, you're going back and forth, and it's the same. You're tracking the same line on the bottom of the pool, and it's mind-numbingly slow for how long when you're trying to go miles, right? It's mind-numbingly slow, And I've come to enjoy it though as well, because there's no music. You're not listening to music. You're just with yourself, with your breath. And it's really interesting. It's becomes a meditation of sorts. And you find yourself kind of catching these flows where it's just like, wow, that 500 meters went by really quickly. Or like, wow, it's only been 200. Or just playing that game of like, should I check my watch? How far has it been? How long has it been? And just being in that zone. So exercise can be a cool active way. Like there's other ways. And I often tell that to people, that there's other ways to be having active meditation versus just like sometimes sitting down and, cross and lotus position can be a little challenging, but going for a walk without your phone, or being really present with your steps, or being in nature in a certain way, or dragging a tire around a park, or swimming, whatever it might be.
Exactly. And another way to also access it, we were talking a lot about physical challenges, and obviously I love that. You get the value of it too. And I think physical challenges we stress on because when you push the body, it's the only way to push both all mind, body, spirit at the same time. Like when you meditate, you're not pushing the body and you're pushing yourself mentally and spiritually. So again, valuable, but physical pushes all three. But another way to do it is look for emotions that you're struggling with and go play in that. So as what I mean by that is, to this day, I will watch scenes from war movies knowing they make me cry. Because I want to experience the intensity of that. So if you're struggling with guilt, like as I was struggling, I'll consciously enter the experience of guilt. So now I can sit with it and see what it reveals in that. Instead of letting the emotion control you, especially because a lot of us, when the emotion arises, we react to it instead of responding to it from a space of awareness and consciousness, right? So if there's an emotion you're struggling with, create the space to consciously enter that emotion. You can use a movie. You can use a music, you can use a YouTube video. And then once the emotion is arise to its fullest, like I've done this and I'll be tearing up, crying, watching some war movie scenes. And then I'll just sit with it, sit with that emotion. It's not comfortable because the inherent nature of this is you're accessing a challenging emotion, but it is such a powerful practice to go into the emotional triggers that you struggle with and be with them fully.
Yeah. And they're messengers, right? I always like to view them as messengers, and a lot of times we like to kill the messenger, and we avoiding the emotion or avoiding the feeling we think is gonna solve it, but really it's just killing the messenger, and that energy has to go somewhere, and then we're almost living in fear of that thing, or we're living as a prisoner in that thing. But when we can actually create that space, like you're saying, to just tune into how are you feeling, and to feel the emotion, whatever it might be, guilt, fear, stress, worry, anxiety, shame, whatever it might be, but to sit. And this is something I do every single morning as I'm journaling and I'm in my morning zone and my morning practices. I'll feel like what is present with me right now. And I've learned that as soon as that happens, and as soon as I allow myself to feel the emotion fully, and feeling on it and acting on it are two different things as well, but creating the safe space to feel it fully, then every single time, two things happen. One, the emotion releases, right? Yeah. When I'm able to really fully experience it, it releases. It's like it's because I'm paying attention to it. I'm giving it its moment, right? It releases. And then two, I'm left with some sort of insight. There's some insight there that's there for me, that connects me, brings me closer to God, brings me closer to myself, brings me closer to my purpose. It's every single time there's those two things that I'm always left with, of creating that container to be able to feel the emotions. And it's challenging too when a lot of us have stories with our emotions, of whether it's growing up, men don't cry, or for women, you're being overly emotional, don't be emotional. Like we have these stories in society of how we're supposed to handle our emotions, and I feel like it's something that's just not talked about enough. But building that emotional health and that ability to use that as one of the greatest forms of spirituality, and one of our greatest teachers and lessons and insights and wisdom. It's our intuition whispering to us through these different messengers. It's something that it's been really present for me lately in this part of my journey, my development, and everything else is just microcosms that bring it up. Business, right? Things happening in business bring up things. They're mirrors, right? They just hold up the mirrors. Training for triathlon, a little tweak here, a calf thing I'm dealing with here. It's like it's mirrors. And when we can view them as mirrors, to sit with it, then the transformation can happen and the energy starts to move, versus trying to ignore it. Then we're just being held captive by those things.
Absolutely. I love that, man. Yeah. And also when you feel those challenging emotions more fully, it also allows you to feel the other ones. When you open the door to the emotions, you just feel the rapture of life. You feel more awe. You feel alive in a more intense way, and everything in life is amplified. And like what, that's a beautiful way to live. You feel bliss in the day-to-day content of this human experience, even when it's challenging. But those challenging, I mean, in
Yes.
fact, just the other day with my fiance now, I was telling her, I was like, life has been so amazing. We've been dating for 3.5 months, now engaged. I'm like, it's been so amazing. I actually want to create a space to consciously go into the darkness a little bit. Not because I'm not happy or anything, but I want to go there a little bit. I want to play there a little bit, see what else is waiting for me. Because there's always new growth. Until the day we
Right.
die, there's always new awakenings. There's always new doors to open, And so because I'm playing on that one edge so much, or that edge has been so amplified of life has been great, I've been happy, I actually want to go into the other one a little bit. And then it amplifies everything when you experience both edges.
Like you said, you can't appreciate the brightness of the light until you've been in the depths
Dark.
of the darkness.
Exactly.
And there's another saying like that around you can't appreciate the view for the peaks of the mountains until you've been into the lows of the valleys. And that's so much with the experience here, I feel. And I love the branding around Fearvana and the merging of these two things, and being able to talk about and share about these things in more practical ways that we can all use them, because there's so much there. And so I'm super grateful here as we're wrapping up our time. I'm super grateful to have connected with you, and to have you leading the way in such a visceral way, right? In a way that's going to like whip heads around and catch attention, to be able to deliver this deeper message with it. And that I find deeply inspiring, and why I'm so grateful to be able to support and every which way I can, and to be able to witness your journey and be part of it as well.
Thank you, brother. Your support means the world to me. I'm so grateful to you too. So grateful that we're connected. It's gonna be a fun and intense adventure together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how can, for listeners, how can people support? Where can people find you? What's the best way to support you?
Thank you for asking. Best way to support, as I mentioned, we're still doing an active fundraiser.
Yep.
We have a crowdfunding campaign going. We've raised over 175K so far. And if you go to greatsoulcrossing.com, that's great, SOUL, greatsoulcrossing.com. There's a crowdfunding campaign, and I offer different bonuses. Like I have deep dive on my method acting training that I've shared with you, and a lot like high access training of some of the advanced mindset tools I've used, not just for Antarctica, but throughout in developing mind, body, spirit mastery, that I give away at the different donation tiers. So those would be really any support there. Every bit makes a difference, whether it's $30 or $1,000, every bit adds up and makes a difference. That's one way. And the book Fearvana is on Amazon in Audible, Kindle, paperback, all of that good stuff as well. Right. And all the profits we've donated to charity as well. So
did you record the audiobook yourself for Audible?
I did. Yep.
Nice. Okay, cool. I love listening to the audiobooks when it's the author that is recording it. Cool. I'm gonna cue that one up, and then one other question for you, just while it's top of mind, it's like, what are the real real risks with doing this great soul crossing, with doing the unassisted ski across? Like, what are you preparing for? Of just like, what are the real risks or the real fear around that? Like, what are the things that you're working against?
At its most extreme is the fear of death.
Sure.
But, polar exploration is not as dangerous as, let's say, like Alex Honnold's free solo climbing. What draws me is not as much the danger as the suffering, but there are sections of the journey where there's crevasses. Falling into one of those is the most horrifying thing for me. So there's that. And then there's the fear of the depth of suffering I'll be forced to endure. And will I be able to push through? Will I be able to complete this journey? Last season, three adventurers attempted a partial crossing of Antarctica, not even a full crossing, coast to coast, partial crossing, all three failed. And not like they're all alive, but they just couldn't cover the distance in time. So there's the tremendous fear of failure that I could have devoted the last 4 or 5 years of my life to this directly, training mind, body, spirit, finances, committed everything to it. And I could go out for 100 days and not cover the distance. There's that. There's also just the fear of the solitude, fear of the suffering, fear of the risks of, this shouldn't happen, but because I'll be well trained, but the storms out there are hurricane level winds. If I lose my tent or a down jacket, you're in a world of hurt, to say the least. It's a terrifying journey. And even the mental stillness, you're skiing into empty white nothingness for 12 hours a day, just with a very heavy sled. So as we always say, there's no easy days in Antarctica. There's just less hard days, because every day there's no stimuli, right? Like unlike mountaineering, with every day is kind of different. There's new views. Every day is just white nothingness. So the mind is so strong to deal with the stillness of that.
Yeah, it's like doing a darkness retreat on a, with a rower machine to full tilt for 12 hours a day, just going. Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, I'm very, very excited and to just
Thank you, brother.
to be around for this journey here. And thank you for your time. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for sharing in the way that you
Likewise.
do,
Thanks for
truly.
having me.
And looking forward to we'll have another conversation here. I'd love to have another conversation, perhaps before you head out, seeing how the rest of training goes, and then obviously when you return as well, and sharing all the amazing wisdom from what you're about to go access.
Thank you, brother. Looking forward
All
to
right, brother.
journey
Much
ahead.
love. Thank you.